Let me tell you something about avoidance. They wear a mask, one that says, "I don't need anyone, I'm fine on my own," or "I'm not ready for a relationship." But here's the truth arc. That mask isn't strength. It's a defense system built over years of fear, rejection, and emotional walls. But even the strongest masks crack. And today, I want to give you 5 psychological triggers that quietly, but powerfully, crumble the avoidance illusion of control, not to hurt them, but to help you reclaim your power and stop playing small for someone emotionally unavailable. Avoidants often rely on a predictable emotional pattern. They push people away, create distance, and wait for the other person to panic, react, or chase. This cycle reinforces their internal narrativing that they're too much for others, that closeness always leads to pain, and that it's safer to stay detached. But what they don't expect is emotional consistency. When someone, especially a super empath, shows up with steady, calm energy, it interrupts their cycle completely. It's not loud, not confrontational, and not dramatic. It's just stable. And that stability becomes the exact thing that shakes their emotional foundation. Emotional consistency doesn't mean being passive. It means being grounded. It means showing up in a way that isn't reactive to their withdrawal, their silence, or their hot and cold behavior. Instead of chasing when they pull away, you stay still. Instead of questioning your worth, you stand firm in it. That confuses them because their past experiences have taught them that emotional detachment gives them control. But when you don't play into that dynamic, when you don't reward their distance with more attention, they begin to feel something they didn't anticipate: insecurity. Avoidants tend to feel powerful when they create distance. They feel safe when others react emotionally to their absence. But your emotional consistency removes that power. It says, "I'm not here to be controlled by your silence." Without ever having to say those words out loud, that message is communicated through your energy. Your ability to remain calm, centered, and focused on your own emotional well-being regardless of their behavior. What makes this trigger so powerful is that it operates silently. It doesn't argue. It doesn't explain. It doesn't plead. It simply exists. And for the avoidant who expects emotional chaos to prove they matter, that kind of stability is both foreign and unsettling. They begin to wonder why you're not reacting, why you're not chasing, why you're not falling apart like others have. And that self-questioning begins to poke holes in their emotional armor. Many super empaths have been trained to believe that their emotions are too much, that they must walk on eggshells to keep the peace. But when they heal, when they realize that peace starts within, they no longer seek validation through reaction. They become emotionally anchored. And from that place, their consistency becomes their strength. They're no longer participating in the avoidance unspoken game of prove your worth by proving you'll stay. Over time, this steady emotional presence forces the avoidant to confront their own patterns. They can no longer blame chaos on the other person. They can no longer pretend they're in control. And often, they begin to feel exposed. Not because you pointed a finger, but because your calmness reflects everything they're running from. It reveals the cracks in their mask, and they begin to realize that the game they've played for so long no longer works on you. That's when the real shift begins, not with yelling or confrontation, but with stillness. The kind of stillness that makes someone finally hear their own noise. Silence is often misunderstood in relationships. Many people interpret it as disinterest, punishment, or avoidance. But when used intentionally, silence becomes one of the most powerful communication tools. Especially when dealing with an avoidant personality, avoidants are used to controlling the emotional tempo by withdrawing. They pull back when things get too close. They go quiet when they feel overwhelmed. They create space not to connect, but to protect themselves. What they expect in return is for the other person to fill the silence. By reaching out, by over-explaining, by pleading, or by chasing, that reaction reinforces their belief that they hold the emotional upper hand. But when you meet their silence with silence, not out of fear, but from a place of grounded self-worth, it sends a completely different message. That message is, I will not chase what won't meet halfway. It's subtle, yet powerful. It tells the avoidant that their usual tactics don't work anymore. You're not afraid of the space. You're not triggered by their withdrawal. You're comfortable in the quiet because your peace doesn't depend on their presence. That kind of self-possession is incredibly unsettling for someone who's used to emotional control. They start wondering why you're not responding like others have, why you're not rushing in to fix things, why you're not anxiously trying to reconnect. And in that wondering, they begin to feel the very uncertainty they tried to create in you. This strategic silence is not the same as the silent treatment. The silent treatment is manipulative. It's meant to punish. Strategic silence, on the other hand, is rooted in self-respect. It's the recognition that not every withdrawal needs to be met with pursuit. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is pause and let the other person feel the weight of their own emotional distance. That pause forces them to confront themselves. It makes them sit with their discomfort instead of distracting themselves with your emotional reactions. What happens next is often revealing. Some avoidants become confused, some feel threatened, and some slowly start to break down emotionally because the silence doesn't give them the validation they were seeking. They expected you to fight for their attention. But instead, they're left facing their own emptiness without the usual distraction of someone trying to win them back. That moment, when your silence holds the space instead of collapsing into it, is when the avoidant begins to lose their power. The key here is emotional neutrality. You're not using silence to provoke, you're using it to protect your peace. You're giving them the space they seem to want, but on your terms, not theirs. And by doing that, you create a boundary without having to say a word. That boundary doesn't scream, beg, or plead. It simply says, I won't fight to be where I'm not invited. For someone with avoidant tendencies, that kind of energy is unfamiliar. They're used to emotional dependency, not emotional autonomy. And when they realize that your silence isn't weakness, it's strength, they begin to feel the shift in power. The control they once had slips quietly through their fingers, not because you shooted, but because you didn't say a thing. Avoidants are deeply uncomfortable with emotional intimacy, even though many of them consciously crave connection. They often operate with a fear-based belief system that tells them getting too close will lead to rejection, loss of independence, or emotional pain. So, to protect themselves, they keep their emotional walls high. They may seem charming, attentive, or warm at first, but as soon as the connection deepens, they begin to pull away. What disrupts this pattern more than anything else is genuine emotional availability, especially when it's presented without needness or expectation. When a super empath or emotionally grounded person shows up and expresses their emotions calmly, clearly, and unapologetically, it challenges the entire avoidant framework. Avoidants are not used to people being emotionally honest without trying to manipulate an outcome. They've often experienced emotional expression as something that comes with strings attached, demands, pressure, or emotional flooding. But when you're able to say, this is how I feel, without asking them to fix it or immediately respond, it confronts them with a reality they haven't dealt with before. It forces them to see someone be without being reactive. And that unsettles them. It shines a light on their own emotional limitations. Your openness holds up a mirror to their avoidance. And in that reflection, they can no longer hide behind detachment. There's a power in emotional availability that isn't loud or overbearing. It's calm. It's confident. It's vulnerable without being weak. When you can express love, hurt, disappointment, or desire with emotional clarity, it shows a level of maturity that the avoidant often lacks. It also removes their ability to blame you for emotional drama. You're not yelling. You're not chasing. You're simply showing up fully present with your heart in the open. That level of emotional presence is disarming. It makes them question their own emotional depth, or lack of it. For the avoidant, who often masks vulnerability with detachment or logic, this kind of presence is difficult to navigate. They don't know how to respond because it doesn't fit their usual emotional script. They expect either silence or chaos, not calm honesty, and because of that, they begin to feel emotionally exposed. Not because you demanded anything, but because your openness revealed how emotionally guarded they've become. In that moment, they can't deflect. They can't pretend everything is fine. They're faced with the reality that emotional connection is possible, but they're the ones resisting it. This becomes especially powerful when you don't use your emotional honesty to control the outcome. You're not trying to pull them closer. You're not using your feelings as leverage. You're simply being real. That kind of emotional integrity is rare, and the avoidant knows it. Deep down, they often feel unworthy of that kind of connection, which is why they push it away. But the more grounded and emotionally aware you are, the harder it becomes for them to maintain their mask. Your vulnerability highlights their emotional absence, and in that contrast, they begin to feel the weight of their avoidance. The thing they were trying to run from, the intimacy they secretly wanted but feared, has arrived, and it didn't come with chaos. It came with calm, open truth. And that changes everything. Avoidants are used to relationships where boundaries are either unclear or unstable. They often rely on others to bend, overextend, or compromise in order to maintain the connection. This dynamic allows them to maintain emotional control while keeping intimacy at a safe distance. They've learned, sometimes unconsciously, that when they pull away or act cold, the other person will try harder. But when a super empath or emotionally grounded person starts setting boundaries, clear, calm, firm boundaries, without emotional drama or explanation, it sends a powerful message. It tells the avoidant that their behaviors no longer dictate the emotional landscape of the relationship. Most people are conditioned to associate boundaries with conflict. They fear that saying no, asking for space, or voicing their needs will push the other person away. But the reality is, boundaries aren't rejection, they are self-respect. When you start placing healthy limits on what you will and won't tolerate, especially with someone who fears closeness, it disrupts the imbalance they've relied on. The avoidant is no longer in charge of deciding how much connection is allowed you are, and that shift in power is subtle but deeply impactful. The beauty of boundaries without drama is that they don't come with yelling, accusations, or ultimatums. Instead, they're delivered with clarity and calm energy. You're not asking for permission. You're simply stating your emotional needs with certainty. That kind of energy is incredibly grounding. It shows that you're not dependent on their approval to honor your own limits. And that confuses the avoidant. They're used to people either collapsing under pressure or becoming emotionally reactive. But your calmness shows that you don't fear their withdrawal. You're prepared for it. This emotional neutrality forces them to confront a reality they've long avoiding. That real connection requires mutual respect. That if they continue to operate from fear and distance, they'll lose access to the safety and consistency you offer. And unlike emotional outbursts, which they can easily dismiss or avoid, calm boundaries stay with them. They echo. They replay in their mind because they weren't born out of emotional instability. They came from emotional clarity. When you say something as simple as, "This isn't working for me," without attacking or explaining, it becomes a line they can't cross without consequence. It's not a threat. It's not manipulation. It's just truth. And truth, when delivered without emotional charge, has a way of sinking in deeply. The avoidant begins to feel the loss of control, not because you forced it, but because you stopped allowing them to operate without accountability. Over time, this type of boundary setting begins to rewire the dynamic. You're no longer chasing connection. You're inviting it, but only on healthy terms. That invitation puts the responsibility back on the avoidant. They have to choose whether they can step up or step out. Either way, your peace is protected. And that is something they rarely encounter because most people are too afraid to lose them. But you're different. Your boundaries aren't a reaction. They're a declaration of your worth. And that makes them feel something they rarely feel in relationships: powerless in the face of your calm strength. Avoidants often expect that no matter how much they push someone away, that person will still be there, waiting, hoping, clinging to the idea that the avoidant will one day come around. They become used to people overextending themselves, excusing their emotional distance, and accepting breadcrumbs in place of real connection. So, when someone who once cared deeply suddenly becomes detached, not out of resentment, but with quiet, unapologetic acceptance, it shakes the very foundation of the avoidant's emotional control. This kind of detachment isn't cold, it's clear. It doesn't come from bitterness, but from a deep realization that their emotional inconsistency no longer holds power. Unapologetic detachment means you stop trying to change the story. You stop arguing, proving, and negotiating your worth. Have you recognized that your peace is more important than their potential? And without saying a word, you shift the entire dynamic. You no longer exist as a source of validation or emotional supply. You stop participating in their push-pull games, and that shift feels like a void to them. A void they created, but one they never expected to actually face. Avoidants often operate with an illusion of control. They believe that by staying emotionally distant, they can avoid pain and maintain power. But when you detach, you take away the one thing that made them feel significant in the relationship, your emotional investment. When your attention fades, when your energy is no longer available to them, they begin to feel the impact of your absence. And that absence speaks louder than any confrontation ever could. What makes this detachment so powerful is its purity. You're not pretending to be done. You are done. You're not pulling away to get a reaction. You're pulling away because you've reclaimed your value. And avoidants can feel that. They can sense the difference between temporary silence and permanent peace. For someone who thrives on subtle emotional control, realizing they no longer affect you is a form of ego death. They start to question why you stopped trying, why you no longer care, and why their usual tactics no longer work. The most unexpected part for the avoidant is the fact that they begin to feel emotionally abandoned, something they deeply fear but constantly create. When you were available, they ignored it. When you were emotionally present, they pushed it away. But now that you're emotionally removed, they feel the sting of what they lost. And not because you made them feel it, but because your detachment forced them to sit with the very emptiness they were trying to avoid all along. This type of letting go is rare. Most people leave with unresolved feelings, anger, or chaos. But when you leave with clarity, when your silence is peaceful and your absence is firm, it leaves a lasting impression. The avoidant realizes, often too late, that you were the safe place they never allowed themselves to settle into. Your detachment isn't a punishment, it's a reflection of self-worth. And in that reflection, the avoidant finally sees themselves, not through the lens of your love, but through the space you left behind, a space that once held warmth, patience, and understanding, a space they never valued until it was no longer theirs to return to. So now you understand, the avoidant doesn't break from confrontation, from shouting, or from chaos. They break where met with something they've never truly faced: in your calm, your clarity, your silence, your boundaries, your detachment. These aren't weapons. They're reflections of healing, of growth, of a love for yourself that finally becomes louder than your desire to be chosen by someone unavailable. If you've ever felt like you were too much, too emotional, too intense, let me tell you this: you were never too much. You were just too real for someone still hiding. You don't need to shrink to be loved. You don't need to chase to be seen. You don't need to beg to be enough. Your emotional intelligence, your empathy, your softness, these are not weaknesses. They are your superpowers. And when you pair them with boundaries and self-respect, you don't just survive relationships with avoidance, you outgrow them. And that's the most powerful transformation of all. Thank you for spending your time with me today. If this message resonated with you, I hope you carry it forward, not just as insight, but as truth. Truth that guides your choices. Truth that honors your worth. Truth that reminds Yug, you are not here to fix broken people. You are here to be whole with or without them. Take care of your heart. Stay grounded in your power. And as always, thank you for listening. Stay strong, stay soft, and stay true to you.